Ukraine's president repeats his call for face-to-face talks with Vladimir Putin as Russia's invasion enters day 27. Rescue teams arrive at the site of China's worst passenger plane crash in decades, but there are no signs of survivors. The fight against food inflation, what the government is doing to keep prices down. Plus, a special park welcomes some very special inhabitants in eastern Taiwan. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeated his call for direct talks with Vladimir Putin and says he is prepared to discuss a commitment not to join NATO in exchange for a ceasefire deal and the withdrawal of Russian troops from his country. Russia's military is continuing to target multiple Ukrainian cities, including the capital, Kyiv. Bing Wang reports.
Rummaging through the rubble, survivors left to search through what remains of an apartment complex in Kyiv that was targeted by Russian forces, exposing the entire front of the building. Also destroyed, a shopping center in Ukraine's capital, with at least 8 people known to have died. Russia's defense ministry says the mall was being used to store military hardware. A Ukrainian army chaplain at the scene condemned the attack.
Росія ракетами обстріляла на даний момент торговий комплекс. Жахливі руйнування, від котрих постраждали як торговий комплекс, так само і навколишні будівлі. Напевно, цікаво буде всьому світові, тут нема стратегічних військових об'єктів, як вони про то говорять.
Around the country, more scenes of violence. In the Russian-occupied southern city of Kherson, security cameras caught Russian troops using stun grenades and gunfire to disperse hundreds of anti-occupation protesters. And in the southeastern port city of Mariupol, hundreds of thousands are stuck without food, electricity, and water. On the receiving end of a barrage of Russian artillery, Mariupol has almost been completely destroyed. A humanitarian convoy from the Red Cross is still stuck outside the city, waiting to enter.
So from the Ukrainian Red Cross side, they are still waiting the green light, but unfortunately so far, and this is the news of this morning, they have no access in the areas, which is, of course, you know, there are very tough ongoing operations in the city.
To negotiate a ceasefire, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is insisting on meeting face-to-face with Russian leader Vladimir Putin. And Zelensky says any compromise will need the consent of the Ukrainian people.
Якщо бути повністю відвертим, то і в питаннях гарантій безпеки ми з вами будемо говорити про конституційні зміни українського законодавства. А якщо ми будемо про це говорити, то це у будь-якому випадку буде вирішуватись не тільки президентом, буде вирішуватись, це достатньо довгий процес, і буде вирішуватись і Радою, і народом України.
After several rounds of negotiations, so far no agreement has been made for a ceasefire between the country's representatives. But as the air raid sirens continue to sound in cities across Ukraine, it may be that only the Russian president himself can end what many people are now calling Putin's war. Chris Ma and Bing Wang for TaiwanPlus.
Our reporter Rick Glauert is in Lublin in eastern Poland, a major center for refugees fleeing the war and also for humanitarian aid entering Ukraine. He reports on how Polish border towns are straining under the influence of fleeing Ukrainians.
This is Lublin, a major city in eastern Poland. With a population of 330,000, it's got a long history of being caught between the powers of Europe. Now it's a major hub for those fleeing the conflict in neighboring Ukraine. As the war enters its second month, the number of refugees fleeing across the border from Poland has passed 2 million. Towns like this along the east of Poland are swelling in population, while the humanitarian response has largely been stepped up to meet their needs, especially due to international support. Local leaders are warning that the cities are reaching the capacity of what they can do and encouraging other countries in Europe to do more to accept the displaced people. But Ukrainians in these border towns and cities don't want to go further. They want to stay here, closer to home, so that if things change, they can go back as soon as possible.
Hundreds of rescue personnel have arrived at the site where a Chinese passenger plane crashed on Monday. So far, there are no signs of any survivors. Stash Butler reports.
CCTV cameras capture a plane plunging almost vertically from the sky. And in the immediate aftermath, thick smoke rises from the hills in China's Guangxi province. China Eastern Airlines flight MU5735 from Kunming to Guangzhou was carrying 132 people when it went down on Monday. Search and rescue efforts have been complicated by the difficult terrain.
这里是一个三面环山的山坳啊，现场没有通电，照明情况非常的差。
Rescuers arrived to find a hillside strewn with wreckage. As local fire staff joined the recovery efforts through the night, family members of the people on board gathered at Guangzhou Airport, waiting for their worst fears to be confirmed. One man says his colleague was on the flight.
通知他的家属，然后的话就是告诉他，一个真实的情况。他的母亲，首先呢，他不相信这件事情，因为他的儿子也就29岁。对。
Flight data shows that the plane suddenly dropped from almost 30,000 feet. Right now, the cause of the crash is unclear. The Boeing 737 plane was only about 7 years old. Many questions about the crash remain unanswered, and for the families of those on board, the agonizing wait for news continues. Alex Chen and Stash Butler for TaiwanPlus.
The president of the Marshall Islands is on a state visit to Taiwan and says his country is strongly committed to strengthening the ties between the two nations. President Taiuwan welcomed David Kabua on Tuesday with a military salute in front of the presidential office. She also awarded him the highest honor a Taiwanese president can give to a foreign head of state for his contributions to bilateral ties. President Kabua praised Taiwan as a shining example of a peaceful and progressive nation. He is on his first official visit overseas since taking office in 2020. The Marshall Islands is one of Taiwan's 14 remaining diplomatic allies and one of 4 Pacific Island nations among them. The government is looking at ways to keep Taiwan's rising food prices in check. Figures for February showed food prices were up 5.3% over the previous year, more than double the overall inflation rate of 2.36%. The Council of Agriculture now wants to extend a 3-month business tax exemption on imported soybeans, corn and wheat. The exemption was introduced in early February when farmers blamed higher animal feed prices for a sudden national shortage of eggs. Agriculture Minister Chen Jizong says keeping the price of these staples down will in turn help stabilize prices for eggs, chicken and pork.
会跟行政院极力的来争取，因为那是财政部的一个权责，让这些主要的饲料的营业税从4月底为零，再往后至少延2个月。
Taiwan will have to discard close to 750,000 doses of COVID-19 vaccines by the end of the month, unless they can be used. The Central Epidemic Command Center says 340,000 Moderna doses and 70,000 Pfizer-BioNTech doses will reach their expiry date this week, while 312,000 doses of AstraZeneca will expire at the end of the month. The centre urged members of the public who have not yet been vaccinated to do so as soon as possible. Close to 80% of the country's population have already received 2 doses of a COVID vaccine, and almost half have received a booster shot. A new park has opened in eastern Taiwan to welcome back some long-absent former residents, Formosan Sika deer. Eric Gao has the story.
Fawning over wildlife. Luye Township in eastern Taiwan's Taidong County has created a special park for some special inhabitants. 14 Formosan Sika deer now live in the 3-hectare space behind the township office. Luye Sika Deer Park officially opened to the public on Monday.
你摸起来感觉怎么样？
热热的。
我觉得蛮好的啊，我们正好今天也蛮高兴的，能够碰到这个开幕。
Sika deer used to be found in the wild in Taidong, but the last one was killed by a hunter in 1969. The township started the park project last year to bring the deer back and to create a local, albeit smaller, version of Nara Park in Japan, famous for its roaming Sika deer.
我们效仿日本奈良公园一样， 然后说，但是奈良鹿很凶，有的很凶，有的不凶。但我们希望说，我们台湾人啊，也可以不用出国，就可以跟鹿亲近的地方。
Park officials say the deer population will gradually increase, which will in turn attract more tourists to the area. Klein Wong and Eric Gao for TaiwanPlus.
Coming up, we'll take a look at the man behind Taiwan's first Olympic gold in badminton. Details after the break.
"这是我们台湾人要送给台湾的礼物。
我们都清楚，我们都在一起，在完成一件事情。
这是我们的根。
Thank you for watching Taiwan Plus. For more great news from Taiwan and around the world, download the Taiwan Plus app.
Welcome back. You're watching Taiwan Plus News. A Taiwanese team of experts is heading to Japan to review plans to release treated wastewater from the Fukushima nuclear plant into the sea. Large tanks at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant contain water that was used to cool the reactors after an earthquake and tsunami in 2011 caused a meltdown. But Japan says space in the tanks is running out and it plans to release over 1 million tons of the water into the sea in spring next year. Tokyo says the water has been treated and that releasing it into the sea will not impact human health. But local fishers and neighbouring countries oppose the plan as the radioactive isotope tritium will not be removed from the water before its release. During their trip, the Taiwanese team will be granted access to the plant to understand the techniques being used to treat the wastewater. Taiwan's Atomic Energy Council is also setting up a monitoring system it says could produce daily analysis of seawater by the second half of this year. The United States says it will ban entry to Chinese officials that it says are behind human rights violations. In a statement, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the targeted officials are involved in the persecution of ethnic and religious minorities, as well as the repression of others, such as dissidents and protesters. Washington has yet to say which officials would be barred or how many officials the ban will affect. The travel bans build on visa restrictions imposed during the Trump administration as a response to Beijing's persecution of Xinjiang's Uyghur Muslims, Tibetans and Hong Kong democracy activists. The United States has declared that Myanmar's military has committed genocide against the Rohingya Muslim people. More than 6,000 people were allegedly killed in the first month of a military campaign in August 2017, with the US finding evidence of mass killings, rape and drownings. Since then, hundreds of thousands of Rohingya Muslims have fled Myanmar, mostly to neighbouring Bangladesh. The US declaration of genocide comes as an ASEAN envoy began talks with the military leadership in Myanmar on Monday, aimed at ending hostilities in the country. More than 1,500 people are reported to have been killed since the military coup in February last year.
The attack against Rohingya was widespread and systematic, which is crucial for reaching a determination of crimes against humanity. The evidence also points to a clear intent behind these mass atrocities, the intent to destroy Rohingya in whole or in part. That intent has been corroborated by the accounts of soldiers who took part in the operation and later defected.
To get more on the US's determination of genocide in Myanmar and the hopes for a breakthrough by ASEAN Special Envoy currently in the country, I spoke to Charles Dunst, an associate at the Asia Group and a fellow at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. I began by asking what difference the US's determination would make to the situation on the ground.
I think this is much more about signaling to the Rohingya community that we are aware a genocide happened, we want to get it on the historical record and all of that. I think that's extraordinarily important. I think the question that we have to watch right now is whether or not this statement signals a harder line that's coming from the Biden administration. They've taken a fair amount of sanctions against the junta since the coup last year, but they haven't imposed sanctions on many of the financial flows stemming from oil and energy and all that. It's a long way of saying that there are far more sanctions that the United States could take against Myanmar, but has not yet. And I think it's worth considering that this genocide determination, which is specifically mentioned as targeting, saying the military did this, not the state of Myanmar, whether that's setting up new sanctions, new stronger sanctions against the military.
The ASEAN Special Envoy is in Myanmar right now. What do you think this envoy can hope to achieve? Will the junta listen?
I think off the bat, the junta is probably not going to listen, first off, but I think that Proxicon, the special envoy from Cambodia, is a little bit hampered in his mission by the fact of which government he represents, frankly. I think the Cambodian government has a view of the situation that is probably a little disconnected from reality. It seems as if top leaders in Phnom Penh think that the way to solve the crisis in Myanmar is by boosting the current regime there and saying, this authoritarian regime can bring stability to the situation, and only from there will we have peace. Where I think that is not the reality in Myanmar anymore. You have a population that experienced democracy and is not ready to go back to living under the military. So I think in an ideal world, you would have Proxicon coming to Myanmar and trying to push the regime to moderate a little bit more and to push towards negotiations. But based on the Cambodian approach, I'm pessimistic that this is going to happen.
Why did the US make this statement now? Why didn't they make this much earlier?
So the Trump administration considered a genocide declaration, particularly at the end of the administration. But there was a view, I think, among folks in the administration that if you labeled this treatment a genocide, it would reverberate really poorly on Myanmar's civilian government, which was at the time led by Aung San Suu Kyi, who, of course, a Nobel Prize winner and all of that. But she was not supportive of the Rohingya. She did not stand up for them when the military carried out these atrocities. So there was concern among U.S. officials that if you would weaken the civilian government and actually perhaps instigate a coup. And of course, a coup happened anyway. And it's taken about a year, I think, of deliberations within the Biden administration for folks to come around and basically say, well, Myanmar is already pretty down a very bad path. This genocide declaration is not going to make things any worse. And it's extraordinarily important to get it on the record.
India is the world's biggest producer of betel nuts, with an output of 1.2 million tons in 2020 and 2021. In the coastal town of Mangaluru, a farmer named Ganapathy Bhatt has come up with an innovative way to harvest the betel nuts that grow at the very top of a towering 20-metre tall trees. Ken Ning takes a look at his invention.
This tree scooter is the brainchild of a betel nut farmer in southern India. With his invention, farmer Ganapati Bhatt can ascend a 20-meter-tall betel nut tree in seconds. Bhatt started work on his invention in 2014 due to his advancing age, as he couldn't climb the trees himself anymore. He also couldn't find workers to do it for him.
ಈ ಮಿಷಿನು ನಮಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಭಾಗದಲ್ಲಿ ಅಡಿಕೆ ಬೆಳೆಗಾರರಿಗೆ ತುಂಬ ಕೆಲಸಗಾರ ಅಭಾವ ಇದೆ. ಅದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ನಾವು ಮರಳಿ ಏರಬೇಕಿತ್ತು. ಸಮಯಕ್ಕೆ ಸರಿಯಾಗಿ ನಮಗೆ ಅಡಿಕೆ ಸ್ಪ್ರೇ ಮಾಡೋದು, ಅಡಿಕೆ ಗೊನೆಗೆ ಸ್ಪ್ರೇ ಮಾಡೋದು, ಅಡಿಕೆ ಗೊನೆ ತೆಗೆದು ನಮಗೆ ಅನಿವಾರ್ಯ. ಮಳೆಗಾಲದಲ್ಲಿ ತುಂಬ ಕಷ್ಟ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಆದುದರಿಂದ ಇದು ಒಂದು ಅಡಿಕೆ ಮರ ಏರುವ ಸ್ಕೂಟರ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಅನಿಸಿತು. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ನಾವು ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೀವಿ ಇದನ್ನು.
Bhatt's tree scooter consists of wheels, a chainsaw motor, and a rudimentary seat. He has already sold over 300 of these scooters to other farmers, and his family is very proud of his achievements.
I feel really proud of my dad because this work was not done by anyone and he was the first person to invent this. I feel really proud of him.
Bhatt says some of his neighbors thought he was mad, casting doubts about whether his invention would work. With the success of his scooter, Bhatt is happy that his invention can help improve the lives of his fellow farmers. Bhatt says he's currently working on yet another scooter, this one for scaling coconut trees, and he hopes to unveil his new invention soon. Klein Wang, Eric Gao, and Ken Ning for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwanese Olympians Li Yang and Wang Qiling reached new heights last summer, winning Taiwan's first ever gold medals in badminton by defeating China. But they didn't get there alone. Their coach, Chen Hongling, knows what it takes to make a champion. Here's his story.
教练跟选手最大差别就是，选手训练完，一般我们之前选手训练完就是休息，就是做自己的事情。教练其实主要是你训练完之后，还有一堆行政，比如说一些计划，然后报名，然后还有一些对手一些研究，然后还有一些比如说行政作业，比如说出国，很多大大小小的事情。其实每一项技术或是东西都是每天不断训练累积而成的。我觉得会继续下去的一部分原因，应该也是当初成绩还算不错，就是虽然不一定是冠军，但就是至少是在全国前3、前4这样。就比赛来说，不管是谁都不可能从第一场赢到最后一场，或是整年度都在赢球。因为当初我们出去的时候，是真的从头到尾一直输，也不知道什么状况，反正出去输到最后也有点麻痹吧，就是觉得啊，反正一年都输这么多场，没有差这一场。对，就已经慢慢习惯这种输，但是我们当然会想要赢，想要办法去解决，但是有时候是没办法那么快，短时间内没办法找到这种方法。因为你手先伸，球拍就不会那么利了。因为每个教练的思维或者是打法，或是他想要的模式，会影响到就是你怎么去选材。它会越来越快嘛，第一颗是这样。这样，因为技术来讲，这真的是蛮抽象，而且每个人会有每个人的想法、那特点，所以不是说我今天教他，他就一定要复制我的技术，他可以从我讲的东西去创新他的东西，那变成他自己的东西。因为其实大家一定是基本上只注意金牌啦，银牌可能过说不定2、3个月后，已经忘了银牌是谁。对，就算是金牌，可能也只有在那个时间内会记得，久了之后，大家还是会去慢慢去淡忘。像以奥运来讲，奥运4年才一次，下一个4年你也不知道在哪里，你也不知道还能站在那个球场上，因为运动员很多意外，可能会受伤，就是会有一些巅峰啊什么之类，这种情况太多。那你更要去拿到这个成绩，那我觉得是需要一些天时地利的。只要能够站在球场上，都是努力了10几20年才有办法站在那上面。这次奥运男双就可以拿到金牌，那以前是不可能有去想到这个东西，甚至要拿个牌， 大家都觉得这个不太可能，遥不可及。但是现在已经有人去做到这件事情，那势必后面的一些年轻的选手会想说，既然他可以，我们有人做得到，那我们是不是也可以？所以变成他们的方向跟目标可能会越来越大，会想说我也想要去冲冲看。这对我们来讲可能也是一件好事，就是教练可以找到更多有企图心、有潜力的一些选手。
Thank you for watching Taiwan Plus News. I'm Yin Khvat. We leave you with some footage of visitors flocking to a Mexican archaeological site to welcome the spring equinox. For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, please download the Taiwan Plus app. Stay safe and see you next time.